Welcome back. We're at Parliament in Cape Town. With me, Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene, to talk about his maiden budget speech. Minister, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
You're most welcome.
All right, let me start with this expenditure ceiling. You've lowered it by 10 billion rand for 2015, 2016. But of course, this year you're expecting to collect tax revenue 10 billion rand downwards. Now, how do you reconcile the two?
Look, there are a number of ways, and that is why we have a combination of both the expenditure side but also the revenue side. One of the things we are proposing in terms of the expenditure is efficiencies, and the same with also the tax collection. We haven't closed our tax gap, and we actually think we need to do more in order to do that. But also, as I said, we will be tabling the tax proposals in February, so that is where we are going to see exactly where we are looking at. But we have our tax committee chaired by the judge that is coming up with very interesting proposals, which we will be sharing with the public and engaging on. And there are chances of actually improving our tax collection without necessarily putting a lot of pressure on the economy. But on the expenditure side, and as you've correctly pointed out, we're talking 10 billion. We've identified that. We've identified areas where we say, whilst we will be cutting growth on those non-essential services, but we will be protecting the areas of expenditure that actually protect the poor and that support investment.
Minister, on the front of Eskom, I mean, we've seen this 60 billion rand given as a guarantee that I would imagine essentially being a write-off, is it not? Have I got that right?
It is, but you will see that we actually are not saying the full 60. We're saying if it becomes necessary, we will have to consider the conversion of the loan into equity. But that will depend on how we perform with the other measures that we are proposing for Eskom.
What are they?
The other measures for Eskom that we're proposing, one, are that we have supported Eskom to move towards a cost-reflective tariff, and we are pleased that the regulator approved a 12.69% tariff increase, which only is a 5% more than the 8% that had been approved. But that we also, the caveat is that we also need to protect the poor from the tariff increases that might actually put a lot of pressure on them. And that is why we're talking about assisting municipalities in ensuring that they extend the free basic services to the poor. But in addition to that, we're saying Eskom needs to be able to, because we want to actually deal with the financial sustainability of Eskom in the short run, but for Eskom to be able to raise money in the market on its own. With the guarantees that we already have for them, they should be able to raise about 250 billion going forward. But we're saying we need to make sure that all these other measures, we've said we will actually be putting in an equity of 20 billion. That 20 billion comes, as we said, at a price, because as a country we will have to forego some of our assets. And in doing that, leveraging it from our assets, we're going to make sure that it's also assets that otherwise are not part of the developmental agenda of the state, and it's assets that government should actually consider whether we need to participate.
Can we get some clarity on that? Because as you pointed out, those assets initially intended by government to be part of the developmental agenda. What can you tell us about the sales of those non-strategic assets?
Look,
what are you expecting to get out of that?
I think as government we need to continuously review our participation in some of the areas that we participate in, and that is why there is a lot of speculation about which one, because at the same time you must remember that the assets that you are talking about or the entities that you are talking about are listed entities, and it is important that we handle the matter with the sensitivity that it deserves. So engaging with them before going out public becomes critical. But also, you actually need to look at what is it that is government's business. If government's business in delivering services will be impacted upon, we will not interfere with those. But where we will be able to actually dispose of without government's mandate of delivering on the basic services to the poor and the South African in South Africa in general. We will not interfere with those.
All right, Minister,
but it's a review. It's a review that looks at all of them.
Just looking at some sizable amounts of money, and perhaps you can just remind us about the figures putting forward to the water shortages or the water crisis that we've seen. You've also put some money through to the health, particularly around Ebola.
Yes.
Was that hard to come by in terms of a strategic plan and allocating those finances to those areas?
Look, those allocations were all informed by genuine need. The first allocation that we make of about 157 million goes to cooperative governance. That's local government that was hard hit by the natural disasters. It's something that we cannot avoid, and that is why it forms part of our unforeseeable and unavoidable expenditure.
Yep.
The issue of Ebola has hit the West Africa and that has impacted upon a number of economies. Africa, not only Africa, but you have seen, we are just returned from the IMF World Bank meetings, where it was clear that some countries had thought that Ebola won't affect them, and we've seen the most advanced economies like the US already identifying Ebola cases. 2 people have already been identified in the US, and an Ebola case in Spain.
Yeah.
So the decision is informed by the fact that you need to do 2 things. You need to try and insulate your country against Ebola, because there's the movement of people through airlines and everything means that the world is smaller than it used to be in the past. But also when you look at so that's the part that you need to try and insulate yourself, protect the country, put in place measures where you are able to screen passengers, where you are able to make sure that when there are symptoms, those people are immediately dealt with and quarantined. But you also need to play our role in supporting the affected countries, and that is what the 32.6 million is allocated for.
I want to talk about infrastructure development, and more importantly, Minister, many people are asking now, we've heard the infrastructure plans, we know that it's going to contribute to job creation, and we know its role it has in economic growth. Are we going to hear more of the implementation going forward, of exactly what government expects business to do and how it expects it to unfold as far as the infrastructure rollout is concerned?
I think that is our focus now, because we're done with the plans. We've planned, we've put everything in place. The 847 billion rands that we have allocated for the next coming 3 years is already allocated in terms of the medium-term strategic framework and in terms of the medium-term expenditure framework. It is already allocated. Part of it lies in the state-owned companies, part of it is in government departments. But the biggest thing is that if you look at the Presidential Infrastructure Coordinating Committee, where we have identified those strategic integrated projects, is the catalytic nature of those projects. And that's where implementation becomes critical. But also, I made an example in the speech about Operation Pakisa, where we have pulled in all the stakeholders to study the ocean, to look at the ocean economy, where everybody that matters was in the room under expert guidance, and we've come up with a plan where the private sector was participating, government was participating, even civil society was participating in a way. So implementation is now, our only focus, because the plans are there. Mm-hmm. So there is no need for anyone to be wasting time on planning. We actually now need to put time frames and make sure, because those time frames are found in our MTSF, they are found in our MTEF. And it is on that basis that resources have been allocated, even from the time of our budget in February.
I want to end off just going back to tax, Minister. I mean, you call some of the changes that you're making for the 2015 here to raise at least 12 billion rand, policy and administrative changes. Who are the casualties here in terms of tax?
As I said, you know how we normally process our tax policy. We actually put it out for an extensive consultation process, and I said that the details will be presented in our February budget. But the fact of the matter is, we actually first have to deal with the efficiency, and the efficiency touches on all of us. But then going forward, in terms of where there are other sources of revenue, the recommendations of the committee become critical, but also we're looking at other avenues like all the other economies are beginning to look.
Finance Minister Nhlanhla Nene, thanks very much indeed for talking to us.
Thank you.